The name of my book is If You Say So, Claude, told by Joan Lowry Nixon, pictures by Lorinda Bryan Colley. In the spring, after the last of the big snows, Shirley and Claude drove down from the silver-mining towns of the Rocky Mountains. They headed for that great state called Texas. Claude was as short as he was broad, with a curly gray beard that waggled when he talked. Shirley was as tall as a doorpost and almost as thin, with hair and skin the color of prairie dust with the sun on it. They drove in a covered wagon pulled by two swayed-back but good-natured horses. "I can't abide these mining towns any longer, Shirley. All that shooting and yelling is too rough a life for me. I've heard there's plenty of peace and quiet to be found in that great state called Texas." "If you say so, Claude," Shirley said, but she missed the mountains and the forests and the plum good looks of the Colorado Territory. They followed a trail that cut south and turned east into upper West Texas, where long canyons dug deep into the hard rock. "Will you look at that?" Claude cried. He eased the horses and wagon down a trail to the bottom of a narrow, rocky canyon. The purple shadows lay over them, and the silence lay around them. "Shirley, I do believe this is the peaceful place that we've been looking for." "I hope not," Shirley said. "I don't really take to this place, Claude. I feel like I'm in a four-sided box." "Never you mind. This land will grow on you, Shirley. For now, why don't you take the rifle and see if you can hunt some meat up for the table? I'll get our sleeping pallets out, and I will tend to the horses." So Shirley unfolded her long legs, stuck her feet in her boots, hiked up her skirts, and climbed down from the wagon. She took the rifle and edged past the back of the wagon. Right off, she spied a fat, lop-eared rabbit sitting on a rock just across the narrow canyon. So she raised the rifle and fired. Well, Shirley's aim never was very good, so she missed the rabbit, and that old bullet bounced off the rock and back and forth across the canyon, a wanging and a banging and a zinging and a zanging, making a terrible racket. Shirley and the rabbit just froze, staring wide-eyed at each other. Well, Claude took that moment to stick his head out of the back of the wagon to see what that awful noise was, and the bullet tore right through the top of his hat, dropping it in the dust at Shirley's feet. Claude looked across the canyon just in time to see that rabbit hightail it behind a ledge. He thought on it for a moment and he said, "Shirley, get back in the wagon. I don't think we want to live in a place where we can't go and get our meat for the table without the rabbit shooting back at us. We are going to have to move on." Shirley picked up Claude's hat, climbed back in the wagon, and gave a happy sigh of relief. "If you say so, Claude." For 2 days, Shirley and Claude headed south, farther down into that great state called Texas. The sun was mean enough to sizzle lizards and curl up the cracks in the dried-out earth when Claude pulled the sweating but good-natured horses to a stop. He said, "Shirley, I do believe this is the peaceful place that we've been looking for." Shirley gazed at the flat landscape that stretched before her gray and bleak, broken only by the clumps of scrubby mesquite bushes, and she said, "I hope not, Claude. This land has got the worst case of the uglies I've ever seen." "Oh, never you mind, Shirley. It'll grow on you. For now, why don't you go see if you can find in the way of firewood? I'll get our sleeping pallets out of the wagon and I'll tend to the horses." So Shirley unfolded her long legs, stuck her feet in her boots, hiked up her skirts, and climbed down from the wagon. She walked back a ways among the clumps of mesquite. Suddenly, she heard an angry rattle. She looked down, and her right boot was planted square on the neck of a mad 5-foot diamondback rattler that had stretched out in the shade to take a nap. Before she could think what to do, she heard another noise. She looked over to her left to see a mean little wild hog. Its beady eyes glared, its sharp tusks quivered, and its small hooves pawed the ground, getting ready to charge. Quick as she could, Shirley stooped down, grabbed the snake careful-like around the neck, and using it as a whip, flipped its tail at the wild hog. That tail, rattle and all, wrapped itself tight about the neck of the hog. But the hog was coming fast, and all Shirley could do was hang on to the snake and use all her strength to twirl the hog clear off his feet and round and around her head. With a zap, she let go. The snake fell to the ground, done for. But the hog flew off, squealing and snorting and carrying on something awful. Well, we all know Shirley's aim never was very good, so it happened just as Claude climbed down from the wagon to see what was making the terrible racket, that the hog sailed right past his face, nearly brushing the end of his nose. Claude watched the hog until he was out of sight, way yonder past a far clump of mesquite. He thought on it for a moment and he said, "Shirley, get back in the wagon. It seems to me a man has a right to set foot outside his wagon without getting bad-mouthed by a wild hog who wants the right-of-way, especially when that hog is in a place that no hogs ought to be. We are going to have to move on." Shirley climbed back in the wagon and gave a happy sigh of relief. "If you say so, Claude." For the next few days, Shirley and Claude headed east into that great state called Texas. The dusty trail rose and took them into the land that was strewn with rocks and boulders of all sizes. Claude put the stumbling but good-natured horses to a stop and said, "Shirley, I do believe this is the peaceful place that we've been looking for." Well, Shirley gazed out at the ridges and the rocks and the stubby trees whose roots clung to the patches of soil, and she said, "I hope not, Claude. This land is nothing but bumpy and lumpy and makes me feel dry enough to spit cotton." "Oh, never you mind, Shirley. This place will grow on you. For now, why don't you set things right around here? I'll get our sleeping pallets out of the wagon and I'll tend to the horses." So Shirley unfolded her long legs, stuck her feet in her boots, hiked up her skirts, and climbed down from the wagon. She strung a line between the rim of the wagon and a branch of a nearby tree, and on it she hung out Claude's long johns and his other shirt and her petticoats and her second-best store-bought dress. She was just finishing this chore when she heard a crackle of a broken twig. She turned around to see a large, mangy wolf creeping closer and closer. His eyes were narrow slits, his ears were laid back, and he was up to no good. Shirley grabbed the nearest thing at hand, the frying pan that was hanging on the back of the wagon, and she let it fly at the wolf. Shirley's aim never was very good, so the frying pan hit the clothesline instead, sweeping it down just as the wolf leaped forward. Unfortunately for the wolf, he dove right inside the skirt and on up through the bodice of Shirley's second-best store-bought dress. His head poked out of the sweetheart neckline and his front paws were pinned so he couldn't use them. Well, he set up a snarling and a yelping and meanwhile bouncing around on his back legs, making a terrible racket. Just as Claude came around the front of the wagon to see what was going on, the old wolf bounced and leaped right on past him, carrying on something awful. Claude watched the wolf until he disappeared around a far boulder. He thought on it for a moment and he said, "Shirley, get back in the wagon. I don't know why that pointy-nosed old lady has got her dander up, but I sure don't want near neighbors that mean and noisy. We are going to have to move on." Shirley gathered up their things, put them in the back of the wagon, climbed up on the seat next to Claude. She gave a happy sigh of relief, and she said, "If you say so, Claude." The trail into that great state called Texas curled east and southeast into its heartland, and as it rose, it softened into rolling hills with meadows cupped between. Splashes of blue and gold and red wildflowers dotted the grassy hillsides, and great oaks spread their branches to make deep pools of shade. Upward they went until they crested a gentle hill. Shirley put a hand on Claude's arm and said, "Stop the wagon, Claude." Well, he pulled the tired but good-natured horses to a stop under a stand of oaks, and she said, "Take a look around. Breathe in that pure air. How's this for our place of peace and quiet?" "I don't know," Claude said. "Any place that looks this good is bound to get filled up with people before long, and then we wouldn't remember what peace and quiet were all about." "Down at the foot of the hill is a stream, probably just jumping with fish," Shirley said. "And you can look far enough in both directions of coming and going so you can spot a traveler and think on for 2 days before he ever gets here." "I don't know," Claude said. "Get down from the wagon, Shirley. See what you can put together for supper. I'll get our sleeping pallets out of the wagon and I'll handle the horses." Shirley unfolded her long legs, stuck her feet in her boots, hiked up her skirts, and climbed down from the wagon. She took out the stew pot and set it under an old gnarled oak tree. Then she took down the rifle. She was going into the woods to find some fresh meat. Suddenly, she heard the rustle of small leaves, and she looked up to see a big bobcat on a branch near her head. His narrow eyes were gleaming, his lips were pulled back in a snarl, and his tail was twitching. Shirley knew he was getting in his mind to set and spring on her. Well, Shirley stared that bobcat square in the eyes, and she said, "I have found my peaceful place, and you're not going to spoil it." She raised her rifle, aimed it dead center at the bobcat, and pulled the trigger. Well, we all know Shirley's aim never was very good. The shot hit that old tree branch, snapping it with a crack that flipped the bobcat in an arc, right over the wagon. He came down so hard against a boulder that the force knocked it loose and rolled it down the hill, tearing up the turf. Behind it came the screeching bobcat, all spraddle-legged, with every pointy claw digging furrows in the soil as he slid down the hill. Splat went the boulder into the stream, knocking 2 good-sized, unsuspecting trout up on the bank and damming up a nice little pond. The bobcat flew over the stream and ran off so fast that Shirley knew she had seen the last of him. Claude came running and said, "Shirley, what is all that racket?" "Nothing much," said Shirley. "Just a few things getting done afore here after a branch fell off of that tree." Claude peered at the tree. "Seems there's something oozing out of the tree into our stew pot," he said. "What pure good luck," Shirley said. "Looks like when that branch broke, it opened up a honeycomb, Claude. You're going to have something good on your biscuits tonight." She took his arm and pointed him toward the sloping hillside. "Take notice that my vegetable garden's already been plowed, and there's 2 good-sized trout down by the stream that are going to be pan-fried for supper." Claude thought of it in a moment, and then he said, "Shirley, get back in the wagon and start pulling the stuff out that we'll need. If you can just learn to do your chores without making so much noise, then I think we have found our peaceful place." Shirley leaned against the wagon and gave a happy sigh of relief. She looked down at the stream that was sparkling with pieces of afternoon sunlight. She gazed out over the hills and the meadows that were soft and pleasing to the eyes. She gave Claude the biggest smile he had ever seen, and she said, If you say so, Claude.